1944. Dawn, Normandy. The German soldiers did not see the Canadians first. They heard them. At first it was one shell, a single impact somewhere beyond the forward position. Come then another, then several more. Then the whole horizon seemed to open. The ground began to shake beneath the trenches. Dust fell from the beams above the dugouts. Loose dirt slid down the walls. Men pressed themselves lower into the earth. Someone reached for a field telephone. Dead. The line was gone. Cut by shell fire, buried by blast, or lost somewhere outside in the smoke. Officers shouted commands. But the barrage swallowed their voices. A man could see another man's mouth moving and still hear nothing but the pressure of explosions. The air became dust. The sky became smoke. The road behind the position disappeared beneath shell bursts. The crossroads that mattered a moment earlier became a place no one wanted to cross. Somewhere beyond the bombardment, the Canadians had not appeared yet. No infantry silhouettes in the smoke. No tanks visible over the field. No rifle fire close enough to identify. And still, the battle had already begun. This was the terror of Canadian artillery. Not one magic gun. Not one weapon that won battles by itself. A system of observers, maps, fire plans, field guns, medium guns, communications, timing. Men far behind the front turning map references into explosions on German ground. To the German soldier under the barrage, none of that system was visible, only the result. The dugout shaking, the wire dead, the road closed, the officer unable to move, the machine gun position buried in dust, the sense that the battlefield was being changed before anyone could answer.
This was the warning.
If the shells were landing here, then somewhere behind the smoke, Canadian infantry and armor were preparing to move. The defenders could not see them yet, but they knew they were coming. First came the shells. Then came the Canadians. Artillery is often remembered as noise, explosion, smoke, fire, a background sounds before the real battle begins. But on the battlefield, artillery was not background, it was control. A shell did not only kill, it stopped movement, it cut telephone lines, it blocked roads, it forced men underground. It made officers hesitate. It made reinforcements late. It made machine gun crews keep their heads down when they needed to fire. It made anti-tank positions difficult to serve. It made a defender ask the most dangerous question in war. Where is the attack really coming from? This is why artillery mattered more than people think. Infantry takes ground. Tanks cross fields. Engineers clear obstacles. But artillery often decides whether any of them can move at all. Before a soldier stands up, before a tank leaves cover, before an assault begins, the guns are already trying to change what the enemy can do. For German defenders, shell fire could turn a prepared position into a prison. A trench that once gave protection could become a place men were afraid to leave. A road that once carried reserves could become open ground, covered by explosions. A headquarters that once controlled a sector could become isolated. A commander could still have men, still have weapons, still have orders. But if he could not communicate, move, or see clearly, his defense was already weakening. That was the power of artillery. Not just destruction, disruption, not just fire, timing, not just killing, paralysis. A barrage did not have to destroy every German position to matter. It only had to break the defender's ability to answer at the right moment. And this is where the Canadian story begins to matter. Canadian soldiers did not advance alone. Behind them were gunners, observers, ammunition crews, signalers, men calculating range, angle, timing, and correction. Men whose work shaped the battlefield before the infantry reached it. This was not clean. It was not bloodless. Artillery could miss. It could fail. It could not remove fear from the infantry who still had to advance. And it could not make war humane. But when it worked, it gave attacking troops a chance to cross ground that might otherwise destroy them. Artillery did not just kill men. It changed what men were able to do. The symbol of this story is a gun. The QF 25-pounder. a British and Commonwealth field gun used widely by Canadian artillery units during the war. Not the only gun, not a secret weapon, not a machine that won battles alone, but one of the most recognizable tools of Canadian and Commonwealth firepower. To a German soldier under bombardment, the exact model often did not matter. He did not hear a technical specification. He heard impact. He heard the earth opening. He heard the warning that Canadian movement might soon follow. But behind that sound was a system. Canadian gunners were part of the Royal Canadian Artillery. They worked with field guns, medium artillery, and heavier guns depending on the campaign and the operation. The 25-pounder became a powerful symbol because it was flexible, widely used, and deeply connected to infantry support. But the weapon alone is not the story. The story is what surrounded it. Maps, communal observers, ammunitions, supply, gun crews, command posts, corrections, timing, coordination with infantry and armor. This is what made artillery dangerous. A gun crew could fire from miles behind the line. A forward observer could watch the fall of shot. Corrections could move fire closer to a target. Multiple batteries could be brought together. A road could be closed. A strongpoint suppressed. A suspected gun position hit. A barrage timed to lift just before infantry moved forward. To the enemy, it could feel like chaos. Shells striking from nowhere. Ground shaking. Smoke, hiding, movement. Positions becoming isolated. But what sounded like chaos to the Germans was often a system working as planned. That does not mean it always worked perfectly. Weather mattered. Maps could be wrong. Communal communications could fail. Shells could fall short. Infantry could still be caught in fire. German guns could answer back. Artillery was powerful, but it was not magic, and the Canadian gunners paid a price too. They worked under counter-battery fire. They handled heavy ammunition for hours. They fought fatigue, mud, cold, smoke, and danger. Their battlefield was not always visible from the front line. But it was real. The gun mattered. But the real weapon was the system behind it. And in Sicily, that system would begin learning under fire. Sicily was one of the first great schools of fire for the Canadian Army. July 1943, hot ground, stone villages, dusty roads, hills that looked empty until guns opened from them. This was not this flat battlefield some men may have imagined. This was hard country that forced every advance through bends in the road, rises in the land, walls, orchards, villages, and enemy positions that could disappear into the terrain. For the Axis defenders, Sicily offered advantages. A ridge could slow a column. A village could become a strong point. A road could become a killing zone. A hill could watch an approach long before the attackers reached it. The defenders expected the ground to work for them. And often, it did. But the Canadians did not move forward with infantry alone. Behind them were the guns. The gunners had to learn quickly where to place batteries, how to support infantry moving through broken terrain, how to answer enemy fire, how to shift fire from one target to another before the infantry lost momentum. This was not perfection. It was learning under pressure. A gun crew could be tired. A map could be difficult to read. Dust could hide targets. Communications could fail. Forward observers could be exposed. And the infantry still had to cross the ground after the shells landed. That is what made Sicily important. Canadian artillery did not become effective because of theory alone. It became effective because men learned on real ground, against real defenses. While infantry waited for support, and enemy positions had to be suppressed before the next move was possible. For the defender, artillery was not just sound in the distance. It meant the Canadians were solving the battlefield before entering it. A gun pit hit, a road blocked, a ridge covered, a strongpoint forced down. One problem at a time, Sicily taught the Canadian gunners that every battlefield had to be solved before it could be crossed, and this lesson would follow them into Italy, into mud, into rivers, into stone houses, into places where the ground itself seemed built to make infantry bleed. Cabano. Italy was a different kind of battlefield. Not fast, not clean, not open. It was mud, rivers, ridges, stone houses, narrow roads, broken villages, and German positions built into ground that punished every step forward. Kommandierste for German defenders, he was a gift of geography. A river could become a wall. A ravine could become a trap. A stone building could become a fortress. A road could be mined, watched, and shelled. A ridge could turn a Canadian advance into a slow climb through fire. The expectation was simple. Make the Canadians pay for every yard. Slow them. Cut them down. Force them into narrow approaches. Turn movement into exhaustion. Turn exhaustion into casualties. This is where the guns behind the infantry became essential. At places like the Moro River, Ortona, the Leary Valley, and the Hitler Line, Canadian infantry faced terrain where courage alone was not enough. Before men could cross rivers, the guns had to hit the far bank. Before infantry could move through streets, the guns had to strike strongpoints. Before tanks could move along roads, enemy positions had to be suppressed. Before a company could stand up and move, someone had to make the German defender keep his head down. But artillery did not make Italy easy. That must be clear. It did not erase mines. It did not remove mud. It did not stop every machine gun. It did not save every man. Canadian infantry still suffered. Gunners still made mistakes. The enemy still fought back. German artillery still answered. And towns like Ortona still became brutal places where men fought room by room and street by street. The guns were not a magic solution. They were the difference between impossible and possible, between a road completely dominated by enemy fire and a road that might be crossed under smoke and shelling, between a defender firing freely and a defender forced underground long enough for infantry to move. From the German point of view, this became a pattern. The Canadians did not always appear first as men in the open, communal. Sometimes they arrived as fire on the road, fire on the ridge, fire on the village, fire on the suspected gun pit, then movement, then infantry, then close battle. That was the rhythm. Artillery first, infantry after. Not always, not everywhere, not perfectly, but often enough that German defenders could understand the warning. When the Canadian guns began to work a position, the attack might be coming. In Italy, Canadian infantry fought forward, but the gunners had to open the ground first. And when the Canadians reached Normandy, that lesson would become even more terrifying for the men waiting in German defensive positions. 1944. Normandy. The Germans knew the Canadians were coming. Maybe not the exact hour, maybe not the exact field, maybe not the exact road, but they knew the pattern of Allied attack. Preparation, fire, smoke, movement, then infantry and armor pushing through the broken ground. The German positions in Normandy were not helpless. They had villages, hedgerows, ridges, anti-tank guns, machine gun posts, mortars, roadblocks, and defensive depth built to delay, punish, and counterattack. German defenders expected to use the terrain. A road could be covered. A field could be registered. A ridge could become an observation point. A village could slow an advance. A hidden anti-tank gun could wait for armor to appear. But before the Canadians moved, the guns often spoke. Shellfire hit forward positions, then roads, then suspected gun pits, then crossroads, then the places where reserves might move, then the places where commanders might try to restore order. To the German soldier inside the bombardment, the experience was not strategic. It was immediate. The dugout shook. Dust filled the air. The telephone went dead. The next position could no longer be seen. The road behind was impossible to cross. The officer's order arrived too late. Or not at all. This is where fear became anticipation. The defenders could not see the Canadian infantry yet. That was the worst part. They knew the attack had begun, but not exactly where the human wave would appear. Would it come through the smoke? Along the road? Across the field? Behind the barrage? With infantry? With engineers? Artillery created uncertainty before contact. and uncertainty is a weapon. A defender pinned in his hole cannot react freely. A machine gun crew under fire cannot dominate the field. A commander with broken communications cannot move reserves with confidence. A man who survives the shelling still has to stand up when the shelling lifts. And then came the moment that gave this story its title. The barrage shifted. The smoke remained. The ground was torn. Men were stunned. Ears rang. Orders were confused. And somewhere beyond the smoke, the Canadians began moving. The defenders could not see the Canadians at first, but they knew they were coming. First came the shells. Then came the Canadians. At first, a soldier counts the explosions. 1, 2, 3. Then the impacts come too quickly. The mind stops counting. The body only reacts. Inside the dugout, the men could feel the ground move. Not once, not from one shell, but again and again, until the earth itself seemed unstable. Dust fell into eyes and mouths. A lamp swung from its hook. A map slid from a table. A man tried to speak, but the sound of his own voice disappeared beneath the bombardment. This was what artillery did to a defense. It did not need to kill every man. It did not need to destroy every bunker. It only needed to make movement impossible at the exact moment. Movement mattered. A runner could not cross open ground. An officer could not safely move from one position to another. A reserve section could not know where it was needed. A machine gun crew could not fire properly if shell bursts kept forcing them down. A man could survive the barrage and still be useless for the minutes that followed. That was the psychological turning point. The barrage became more than fire. It became a wall, a moving wall of noise, smoke, pressure, and uncertainty. Behind it, Canadian infantry could prepare. Behind it, armor could wait. Behind it, engineers could move closer. But in front of it, German defenders were being separated from each other by sound and fear. Communications were fragile in war. Wires could be cut. Radios could fail. Orders could arrive too late. And during an artillery preparation, even a commander who knew what to do might not be able to make anyone else do it. This is why shellfire created fear before the assault itself. The German soldier did not know whether the barrage would lift in 1 minute, or 5, or 10. He did not know whether the next shell would land behind him, in front of him, or directly on the roof above him. He did not know where the Canadians would appear when the shelling stopped. And when the guns finally shifted, silence did not feel like relief. It felt like warning, because every experienced soldier knew what often came after the barrage. Movement, infantry, tanks. The attack. The shelling did not have to destroy every position. It only had to break the defender's ability to answer. And when the wall of fire moved forward, the men in the dugouts knew the next sound might be boots, engines, and Canadian voices in the smoke. The 25-pounder was the symbol, but the symbol alone does not explain the fear. A gun is only steel until men build a system around it. The Canadian gunners did not simply point a weapon and fire into the distance. They worked inside a chain, a forward observer watching enemy ground, a map grid, a target reference, a signal sent back, a correction, a battery responding, and another. Then more guns joining until a single target became a storm. This is what the German defender experienced as sudden violence. But behind the suddenness was work. Calculations, range, elevation, ammunition, communications, fire discipline, men carrying shells, men adjusting sights, men listening for corrections, men firing again and again until the barrel smoked and the ground ahead disappeared beneath dust. The 25-pounder was useful because it could support infantry in many situations. It could fire high explosive. It could help lay smoke. It could respond to fire plans. It could move with armies that needed guns close enough to matter, but flexible, enough to follow. But it was not alone. Canadian artillery also used medium and heavier guns when operations required more weight. The battlefield was not one gun. It was layers of fire. A German soldier might not know which gun was firing. He might not know whether the shell came from a Canadian battery, a British battery, a medium regiment, or a wider Allied fire plan, but he knew the effect. One position hit, then the road behind it, then the crossroads, then the gun pit, then the tree line. What felt like chaos was often direction. This is why artillery could feel intelligent, not because the shells had minds, because men behind them were watching, adjusting, learning. If a shell landed short, the next could move. If a position fired, observers might mark it. If German guns opened, counter-battery fire could answer. But this system had limits. Artillery could be wrong. Fire could miss. Communications could break. Smoke could confuse both sides. A barrage could lift too early, or too late, and infantry still had to cross ground where enemies survived. That is why the gunners should not be remembered as men who made war easy. They did not. They made terrible ground possible to attempt. They fought seconds. They created openings. They forced the enemy down long enough for Canadians to move. To the Germans, the shells sounded like chaos, kamummel. But often, it was a system working exactly as planned. A system of guns, observers, signalers, and crews. And in the Scheldt, that system would be tested in one of the worst battlefields Canadian soldiers ever crossed. The Scheldt was not a battlefield that wanted men to move. It was water, mud, dikes, causeways, flooded fields, narrow roads, fortified German positions, and ground so exposed that every step could feel watched. For German defenders, the terrain was a weapon. A causeway could force attackers into a narrow line. A dike could expose movement. A flooded field could stop vehicles. A village could become a strong point. A road could be shelled, mined, and covered by machine guns. The expectation was clear. Let the ground slow the Canadians. Let the water trap them. Let the defenders punish every crossing. This was the kind of battlefield where artillery became essential, not because it could make the water disappear. Communal it could not. Not because it could drain the mud. Communal it could not. Not because it could remove every German's position. It could not. But because, without it, infantry moving through that ground could be destroyed before they got close. The guns struck strongholds. They covered movement. They hit suspected machine gun nests. They fired on roads and crossroads. They tried to suppress German positions long enough for Canadian soldiers to move through mud, water, and open ground. Every few yards mattered. Every minute of suppression mattered. Every shell that forced a defender down could mean another Canadian section had a chance to move. From the German side, the bombardment did not erase confidence immediately. The terrain was still strong. The defenders still had weapons. Canadian infantry still had to come forward through awful ground. But the artillery changed the rhythm of defense. A machine gun could not fire freely under shell fire. A mortar crew could be forced to move. A forward position could be isolated. A reserve movement could be delayed. A road could become impossible. This was artillery in flooded hell. Not clean, not cinematic in the simple sense. Brutal, slow, grinding. Canadian gunners firing so infantry could cross ground that looked almost uncrossable. And still, the cost remained. Artillery did not save every man. It did not prevent exhaustion. It did not remove fear. It did not turn the Scheldt into victory without suffering. The infantry still had to move. The engineers still had to work. The wounded still had to be carried. The Germans still fought back. That is what makes this story important. Canadian artillery was not a replacement for courage. It was a condition that made courage usable. It gave movement a chance. It gave infantry a few seconds under cover of smoke and blast. It turned impossible ground into ground that could be attempted. The guns could not drain the Scheldt, but they could make the next few shards possible. And by 945, those same lessons in fire, movement, and coordination would reach Germany's western defenses. Rhineland. By now, Germany's western defenses were no longer facing isolated attacks. They were facing a machine. Forests, towns, rivers, roadblocks, dugouts, defensive belts, positions prepared by men who knew the war was coming home. But above them, behind the Allied lines, the guns were gathering. For German defenders, the Rhineland was supposed to slow the Allied advance. The ground was difficult. The weather was harsh. Forests could hide positions. Villages could become strongpoints. Roads could be blocked. Rivers and flooded ground could delay armor and infantry. The expectation was not always victory. Sometimes it was simply time. Delay them, bleed them, make every mile expensive. But by 1945, Allied firepower had matured into something enormous. British guns, Canadian guns, other Allied guns, field artillery, medium artillery, heavy support. A network of fire built to break positions, suppress movement, and make German defense harder to coordinate. The Canadian gunners were part of that system. Not alone, never alone, but present. Firing in support of Canadian formations, pushing through Germany's western approaches. Firing before infantry moved. Firing against known positions. Firing against suspected positions. Firing to stop German guns from answering. Firing to make movement possible through a battlefield that still had teeth. From the German side, the feeling was no longer simply fear of one attack. It was the feeling of a front being crushed by systems. Artillery, armor, aircraft, engineers, logistics, all moving together. A defender could survive one barrage and still face another. A road could be hit before reserves arrived. A gun could be targeted after firing. A position could be cut off before the Canadians ever reached it. This was enemy realization. The shells were not random. The fire was not merely noise. It was preparation, pressure, coordination, the sound of armies that had learned from Sicily, Italy, Normandy, and the Scheldt. By 1945, the shells did not sound like a raid. They sounded like the front collapsing. And somewhere behind that fire, the Canadians were coming again. Behind every barrage were men, not symbols, not machines. Men, Canadian gunners standing in mud, smoke, cold, rain, dust, and exhaustion. Men who lifted shells until their arms burned. Men who served guns until the barrel was hot. Men who listened for orders through broken sleep and distant explosions. It is easy to remember the infantry first. They took the villages. Bupnungs, they crossed the fields. They entered the towns. They appeared in photographs, moving through smoke and rubble. But before many of those movements, there were gun crews behind the line, doing work most viewers never imagine. Ammunition had to arrive. Shells had to be stacked. Guns had to be positioned. Targets had to be calculated. Orders had to be received. Chemical corrections had to be made. Weapons had to be maintained. And when German counter-battery fire came back, the gunners could become targets themselves. The gun line was not always safe. A German shell did not care that a man was behind the infantry. A battery could be hit. A truck could be destroyed. A crew could be wounded while loading the next round. And still, the guns had to keep firing if the infantry ahead needed support. There was also another burden. Many gunners did not always see the result of what they did. They might never see the machine gun position they suppressed. Never see the infantry section that crossed because their shells landed at the right moment. Never see the German road they blocked. Never know which lives their fire saved, or which lives it could not save. Their war was measured differently. Rounds fired, targets engaged, fire missions completed, ammunition moved, guns kept working, infantry supported. Nummel ground made possible, and that is why the gunners deserve to be remembered carefully, not as men who made war clean. War was never clean, not as men who removed the cost. They could not. Not as men who won battles alone. They did not. But as men whose work often gave Canadian infantry and armor a chance to move against defenses that were waiting to destroy them. The 25-pounder became a symbol. The shell casing became a symbol. The first impact became a symbol. But the real story was human. Gun detachments working while tired, forward observers exposed near the front, signalers trying to keep communication alive, drivers bringing ammunition through danger, officers reading maps under pressure, men trusting that if the timing was right, the men ahead might live, and the German soldier under fire knew only the other side of that work. The barrage, the cut wire, the road hit, the dugout shaking, the silence after the shelling lifted, then movement in the smoke. The infantry became famous for taking ground, but often the gunners had already fought for that ground in sound, smoke, and fire. Return to Normandy, or Italy, or the Scheldt, or the Rhineland. The place changes, the feeling remains. A German defender crouched in a position, a barrage lifting, smoke drifting across torn ground, dust in the mouth, ears ringing, a field telephone dead, a road behind the line cratered and dangerous. For a moment there is quiet, not peace, not safety, the kind of quiet that makes men hold their breath. Because every soldier knows that shell fire often ends for a reason, a couple. It lifts, it shifts, it moves forward, and after it moves, men come. That is the story this video has been telling. Canadian artillery was not one weapon. It was not one perfect gun. It was not one miracle barrage. It was a system of men, maps, observers, guns, ammunition, timing, and endurance. A system built to shape the battlefield before Canadian infantry and armor reached it. The shells did not replace the soldiers. They prepared the way for them. The guns did not make battle easy. They made movement possible. The gunners did not erase fear. They forced the enemy down long enough for Canadians to stand up and move. And, still, the cost remained. Infantry had to cross. Armor had to move. Engineers had to clear. Medics had to work. Gunners had to keep firing. The enemy still fought. Men still died. The artillery was powerful, but it was not mercy. That is why this story should be remembered with weight, not as fireworks, not as spectacle, but as one of the overlooked foundations of Canada's battlefield power. The Royal Canadian Artillery did not always stand at the front of the photograph, but again and again, its thunder arrived before the Canadians did. The German soldier often heard Canada before he saw it. A first shell, then another, then the horizon opening, then smoke, Salson, then silence, then movement. First came the shells, then came the